The tray was heavier than it looked. 4 plates of branzino balanced along her forearm, and Rosalind Marsh did not let it shake. She set the first plate down in front of a woman in pearls without a sound, the porcelain kissing the linen tablecloth like it had never touched anything else. That was the job: silence and precision. But across the dining room, near the window that looked out over the wet cobblestone of the street, a table of 2 men had just sat down, and the entire staff of Verrazzano had gone still the way a forest goes still before a storm. She felt it before she understood it. The maitre d' had gone pale and was already moving toward the kitchen instead of the table, which was not how things were done at Verrazzano. Denise, the other floor waitress, grabbed her arm at the service station hard enough to leave a mark. "Do not take that table," Denise said. "Vincent will handle it himself." "Vincent is hiding in the walk-in freezer," Rosalind said, because she had just watched him do exactly that. "Then get Marco to send someone else, anyone else." Rosalind looked past her toward the window table. An older man sat with his spine perfectly straight, silver hair combed back hard enough to look carved from stone, a face that had not smiled in this decade or the last one. Beside him, younger, dark-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that had clearly never seen a department store rack, sat a man who was watching the room the way a man watches a room he owns without needing to say so. He was not looking at the menu. He was looking at his father, and there was something careful in it, something that did not match the older man's granite stillness. "That is Salvatore Conti," Denise whispered, as if the name itself might reach across the room and take something from her. 2 years ago he had a waiter fired for bringing him the wrong wine vintage. Not fired, ruined. The man could not get hired at a diner after that. Nobody wants that table, Roz. Nobody. Somebody has to take it. Then let it be somebody who isn't you. But the floor manager, who had emerged from the kitchen, sweating despite the air conditioning, was already looking at Rosalind with the particular desperation of a man about to ask a favor he had no right to ask. She set her tray down before he could say a word. "I've got it," she said, and picked up 2 water glasses and walked toward the window table before anyone could talk her out of it, because someone was going to have to, and she had never once in 11 years of waiting tables let a table sit unattended out of fear. The younger man looked up first. His eyes were dark, assessing, and they moved over her once, fast, the way a man reads a room for exits. Whatever he found did not seem to concern him. The older man did not look up at all. "Good afternoon," Rosalind said, setting the water down without a tremor in her hand. "My name is Rosalind. I'll be taking care of you both today. Can I start you with something from the bar, or would you like a moment with the wine list?" Salvatore Conti's eyes came up slowly, the way a predator's do, not startled, simply curious that something in the room had made a sound worth acknowledging. "You're new," he said. It was not a question. His voice had the low gravel of a man who had spent 70 years being obeyed. "I've been here 3 years, sir." "3 years, and I have never seen you?" "I usually work the back room, private parties." She did not explain further because he had not asked for an explanation, only a fact, and she had given him one. He studied her face for a long moment, the kind of scrutiny that had, according to Denise, ended careers. Rosalind held it without flinching, without the too bright smile the rest of the staff wore around this table like armor, because armor made of enamel and nerves was easy to see through and easier to despise. "The others run," Salvatore said. "You did not run." "I don't run from customers. It's bad for tips." She said it flatly, no charm in it, no flirtation, just the truth of a woman who had been doing this job long enough to know exactly what it was worth and exactly what it was not. For one full second, nothing happened. Then something shifted in the old man's face, something so small most people in the room would have missed it entirely, a loosening around the eyes that might have been the beginning of respect, or might have been the beginning of something else. The younger man across from him had gone very still, watching his father with an intensity Rosalind could feel from 3 feet away, the intensity of a son who had not seen this particular expression on that particular face in a long time. "Bring me the Barolo," Salvatore said. "The 2015, not the vintage your manager will try to sell me instead because it's cheaper." "I'll bring you exactly what you asked for," Rosalind said, and turned to go, and did not see the way Matteo Conti's eyes followed her the entire distance back to the service station, cataloging the set of her shoulders, the lack of performance in her walk, the way she had not once glanced back to see if she had passed some test she had not known she was taking. She had passed it, she simply did not know it yet. The lunch went on for 90 minutes, and Rosalind returned to that table 7 times, and each time Salvatore Conti spoke to her the same way, direct and without warmth, but without cruelty either, the way a man speaks to someone he has decided is not wasting his time. Matteo said almost nothing to her at all, but she caught him twice studying her hands as she poured the wine, and once when she corrected the busser who tried to clear his father's plate before he was finished, saw something that was almost the shape of a smile cross his mouth before he erased it. At the end of the meal, when she brought the check on its leather tray, Salvatore Conti reached into his jacket and set down more cash than the bill required by a wide margin. And then he did something that made the entire back of house, watching through the kitchen door window, go silent with disbelief. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and extended his hand to her. "Rosalind," he said, and it was the first time all afternoon he had used her name instead of simply looking at her. "You are the first person in this restaurant in 4 years who did not treat me like I was going to bite." "You still might," she said, "but I figure that's your business, not mine." The old man laughed. It was short and rusted from disuse, like an engine that had not turned over in a long time, but it was real, and Matteo Conti, standing beside his father, looked at Rosalind Marsh the way a man looks at something he had stopped expecting to find. That was the moment everything changed, though she would not understand the shape of it until later, when the danger arrived, and there was no version of her life that did not include the Contis in it anymore. They left without another word. She cleared the table, folded the linen, and went back to work, and told herself that was the end of it, a strange lunch shift, and a good tip, and a story to tell Denise on the subway home. She did not know yet that Salvatore Conti did not forget names, and that Matteo Conti did not forget women who made his father laugh, and that both of those facts were about to rearrange the entire architecture of her life. 3 days later, on a Tuesday when the restaurant was quiet and the rain was coming down in the kind of steady gray sheet that made the whole city smell like wet stone, Matteo Conti walked in alone. He did not sit at the window table. He sat at the small two-top near the bar, the one usually reserved for solo diners who wanted to be left alone. And when Vincent hurried over to seat him personally, Matteo said only one thing: "I want her section." Vincent's eyes found Rosalind across the room, with an expression that was half panic and half something that looked suspiciously like relief, because whatever had happened 3 days ago had apparently earned her a strange new kind of immunity in this restaurant, and he waved her over without a word of protest. "Mr. Conti," she said, setting down a glass of water. "Back again so soon?" "My father talked about you for 2 days," he said. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her the first time, but there was less calculation in it now, and more something else, something she did not have a word for yet. "He does not talk about people. He talks about problems, and he talks about business. You are neither." I gave him wine and told him the truth. That's not usually front-page news. "In my world," Matteo said, "it is." She should have felt the warning in that sentence and walked away. Later, she would tell herself she had felt it and stayed anyway, because staying was who she was, because she had never once in her life backed away from a hard truth simply because it frightened her. She took his order, a simple one, and when she brought it, he asked her to sit for a moment, just a moment, and against every instinct that had kept her safe in this city for a decade, she did. "You're not from money," he said. It was not an insult, it was an observation, delivered the way his father delivered them, blunt and without apology. "No." "You work 2 jobs." "3, some weeks." She did not ask how he knew that, because she suspected the answer would frighten her more than the question. "Why here? A woman like you could work anywhere in this city." "A woman like me works where the money is good and the customers don't touch me," she said, and watched something flash behind his eyes, quick and dark, gone before she could name it. "This place pays, that's the whole story. I'm not looking for a fairy tale, Mr. Conti. I'm looking for rent money." "Matteo," he said, "not Mr. Conti, not from you." She did not answer that, because answering it felt like agreeing to something she had not decided to agree to yet, and she stood and cleared his empty water glass instead, and went back to work, and did not see the way he watched her walk away, the same cataloging look from 3 days before, except now there was a kind of hunger folded into it that had nothing to do with food. He came back 4 more times over the following 2 weeks, always alone, always in her section, always leaving a tip that made Denise's eyebrows climb toward her hairline. He never touched her. He never said anything a jury could call inappropriate, but every conversation went a little longer, a little deeper, and Rosalind began to understand, slowly and against her better judgment, that the stillness she had first mistaken for menace was something closer to control, a man holding an enormous amount of power in check, because he had learned somewhere along the way that power, unchecked, destroyed everything it touched. She learned, in fragments, the shape of his world. He did not tell her directly. He did not have to. The way certain men in the restaurant looked away when he entered, the black cars that idled outside no matter the weather, the single time she saw the muscle beneath his jacket shift as a stranger approached the table too fast, and Matteo's hand had gone still and ready before his mind had even finished assessing the threat, and then relaxed, all in under 2 seconds, before she was certain she had seen it at all. She should have stopped waiting on his table. She told herself that every night on the train home, watching the tunnel lights strobe past the window, and every time he walked back through the door of Verrazzano, she found herself moving toward him instead of away, because something in her, some stubborn, unkillable part of her that had gotten her through every hard year of her life, wanted to know the rest of the story. The night everything turned was a Friday, and the restaurant was full, and Matteo was seated at the window table this time, not alone, 3 other men with him in suits that fit the same particular way his did, men who moved like they were used to watching for exits, even while they ate. Rosalind had 2 other tables and a bar order, and did not have time to notice, at first, the black sedan that pulled up across the street and idled there for 11 minutes without a single passenger emerging. She noticed when the busboy, a 19-year-old named Tommy, who had nothing to do with any of this, dropped a tray of glasses near the kitchen door, and in the half-second of noise and chaos that followed, she saw one of the men at Matteo's table go for something inside his jacket, and saw Matteo's hand close over his wrist, hard, a silent order not to move. "Sit," Matteo said, low to his own men, and then, without raising his voice at all, in a tone that carried across the entire dining room like a blade drawn from a sheath, "Everybody stays exactly where they are." The sedan across the street pulled away a moment later, and whatever had almost happened did not happen, and the dinner service resumed as if nothing at all had occurred, except that Rosalind's hands were shaking now as she cleared the shattered glass, and Matteo Conti was watching her do it with an expression on his face she had not seen before, something that looked almost like guilt. He found her in the narrow hallway near the coat check 20 minutes later, when the dining room noise had swallowed them both. "You should not have seen that," he said. "I didn't see anything." "You saw enough." He was closer to her than he had ever stood before, close enough that she could smell cedar and something underneath it, tobacco maybe, or leather, something that did not belong to a bottle from a department store counter. "There are men who would consider what you saw a problem that needs solving. Are you one of them?" "No." His voice had an edge in it she had not heard before, something almost angry, though not at her. "But not everyone at that table tonight answers to me the way they should. That is a separate problem, one I intend to correct." "Should I be worried?" He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face, the careful control she had watched him wear like armor for 2 weeks, cracked just slightly, just enough for her to see what was underneath it. "Yes," he said, "you should. I am telling you that because no one in your life has told you the truth about me yet, and I would rather you hear it from me than learn it the hard way. I am not a safe man to know, Rosalind. My father is not a safe man to know. The people who sat at my table tonight are not safe to know. If you have any sense left after tonight, you will stop taking my table." "That's not really up to you," she said. "I decide who I serve." "This is not about serving." "Then what is it about, Matteo?" It was the first time she had used his first name, and she watched it land on him like a physical thing, watched something in his jaw tighten and something in his eyes go dark and want-ridden in a way he had clearly not intended to let her see. He did not answer the question. He turned and walked back into the dining room instead, and left her standing in the hallway with her heart going too fast, and no good explanation for why she had not simply let him walk away and taken his warning at face value. She should have. She would think about that later, on the nights when everything had already happened and there was no going back to the version of her life where she still could have chosen differently. 2 days later, the restaurant closed for a private event, a Conti family gathering, and Vincent asked her, personally, apologetically, if she would work it. "Time and a half," he said, though she suspected the real reason was that Salvatore Conti had requested her by name, and no one on the staff had the courage to say no to that request. She said yes before she had time to think better of it. The private room at the back of Verrazzano had been transformed for the evening. Low light, a long table set for 12, and Rosalind spent the first hour moving through a crowd of men and women who all seemed to know exactly who belonged in this room and who did not, and she was aware, keenly, of being the second kind, and aware too of Matteo watching her from across the room every time she crossed it, his attention a physical weight she could feel on the back of her neck. Salvatore Conti called her over near the end of the meal, and when she reached him, he did something that made the whole table go quiet, patting the empty chair beside him, an old-world gesture that meant something specific and heavy in this room full of people who understood every unspoken rule that governed it. "Sit," he said. 5 minutes. The old man is tired of talking to people who agree with everything he says." She sat, because refusing him in front of this room felt like a worse mistake than accepting, and for 5 minutes, Salvatore Conti told her, in a voice low enough that only she and Matteo, seated across from them, could hear it, about his wife, dead 11 years now, and about a woman who used to argue with him the same blunt way Rosalind did, who had never once in 30 years of marriage let him win an argument simply because he was Salvatore Conti. "My son does not remember her the way I do," Salvatore said. "He was young when the sickness took her. He remembers her as an idea. I remember her as a person who told me the truth even when it cost her something. There are very few people left in my life who tell me the truth, Rosalind. You are one of the only ones, and you are not even family." "Maybe you should surround yourself with more people who tell the truth," she said, and Salvatore laughed that same rusted laugh, and across the table, Matteo watched his father laugh at something a stranger had said to him, and felt something in his chest move that he had not expected and did not have a name for yet. Later, near the end of the night, after the guests had thinned and the staff had begun clearing the long table, Matteo found her in the kitchen hallway again, the same narrow space where he had warned her away from him 2 nights before. "He hasn't laughed like that since before she died," he said. There was no armor in his voice this time. "Twice, in 2 visits, you did that." "I didn't do anything. I just talked to him." "That is exactly the thing no one else does." He was closer now than he had been the last time, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his eyes. "Everyone in that room tonight is terrified of him. Everyone in that room tonight is terrified of me. You walked into this restaurant 3 weeks ago and treated both of us like we were simply 2 men eating lunch. I do not know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it." "I think I do," he said, and the honesty in it, raw and unrehearsed, was more dangerous than anything he had said to her yet, more dangerous than the warning, more dangerous than the black sedan idling in the rain. "I think about you when I am supposed to be thinking about things that matter far more than a waitress at a restaurant my father likes. I think that is a problem. I think you should walk away from this before it becomes a bigger one." "Is that an order?" "No." His hand came up, slow, and for the first time he touched her. Just her jaw, just his thumb along the line of it. Careful, the way a man is careful with something he is not sure he has the right to touch. "It is a warning I am hoping you will ignore, though I know better than to hope for anything in my line of work." She did not pull away. That was the thing she would think about later, lying awake in her small apartment, with the radiator ticking and the city noise bleeding through the window. That she had stood in that hallway and let Matteo Conti touch her face and had not once thought about leaving. The threat that had idled outside the restaurant in a black sedan did not stay quiet for long. Rosalind learned its name 3 weeks later, when she came in to work on a Thursday and found the restaurant staff clustered near the host stand, whispering, and Denise pulled her aside with a face gone gray and frightened. "There was a man here an hour ago," Denise said, "before service, asking about you specifically, asking what days you work, whether you left alone at night, where you lived. Vincent told him nothing and called the police, and the man left before they arrived. But Ross, he had a photograph of you. Where would a stranger get a photograph of you?" She found out that evening, when Matteo arrived unannounced and pulled her into the private room without explanation, his face carved from the same granite stillness his father wore, except underneath it, this time, she could see something that looked almost like fear. "His name is Nico Russo," Matteo said. "He works for a family that has wanted my territory for 2 years and has not had the nerve to take it directly. They know what my father thinks of you. They know what I think of you, which means they have been watching me more closely than I realized, and now they believe you are a way to reach both of us at once." "So I'm a target because you like me?" "You are a target because in my world, the people we care about are never allowed to simply exist unbothered. I told you that. I told you to stay away from this table." His voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word, the first real crack she had heard in it since the night in the hallway. "I should not have let it go this far." "You didn't let anything happen. I chose to sit down, twice." She stepped closer to him instead of away, because retreating had never once been her instinct, and it was not going to become one now, not with a stranger holding her photograph somewhere out in the city. "So tell me what we do about Nico Russo instead of telling me what you should have done differently." Something in his face changed when she said, "we," a small, violent hope crossing it before he could master his own expression back into stillness. "We do nothing," he said. You go home tonight with 2 of my men outside your building. You do not work alone shifts for the next 2 weeks. You do not walk anywhere without telling me first. And I handle Nico Russo the way these things are handled in my world, which is not a conversation you want the details of. That's not us doing anything. That's you doing everything and me hiding. Rosalind. Her name in his mouth was different than it had ever been, rough at the edges, almost pleading. This is not a negotiation. I have already lost people I could not protect. I am not losing you because you decided bravery was more important than staying alive. She heard, beneath the words, the shape of the wound he had never once mentioned directly, and she understood, with sudden clarity, exactly who he meant when he said people, plural, though he had only ever spoken of one loss before this moment. Who did you lose? She asked, gently now, all the fight gone out of her voice. He was quiet for a long time. When he answered, his voice had none of the polish it usually carried, only the rawness underneath it. My brother, 5 years ago. He was 2 years younger than me, and he trusted the wrong man with information that should never have left this family, and it cost him everything. I was supposed to protect him. I have spent 5 years making certain nothing like that happens again, and now there is a man walking around this city with your photograph in his pocket, and I am terrified, Rosalind, in a way I have not been terrified since the night my brother died. She reached for his hand before she had decided to, and he let her take it, his fingers closing around hers with a grip that told her exactly how much control it was costing him to stand still instead of pulling her against him. Then let me help you end it, she said. Not by hiding, by using what I actually have. I hear things in that dining room, Matteo. Half the men in this city think a waitress is invisible furniture. I could be useful to you instead of a liability you have to guard. Absolutely not. That wasn't a request. He looked at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes, fear and pride, and something that was beginning, unmistakably, to look like love, though neither of them had said the word yet, and both of them were too careful to say it now. If anything happens to you, he said, I will not survive it a second time. Then make sure nothing does, she said, and let me help you make sure of it. He did not agree, not that night. But 2 nights later, when Nico Russo himself walked into Verrazzano under the cover of a Tuesday dinner rush, seated himself at the bar, and ordered a scotch he had no intention of drinking, it was Rosalind who noticed the way his eyes tracked the kitchen door instead of the menu, and Rosalind who noticed the outline of something too heavy for a jacket pocket riding against his hip, and Rosalind who found Matteo in the private room before Russo had finished his first sip and told him exactly what she had seen. He's not here for dinner, she said. He's here to see how close he can get. Matteo's face went cold in a way she had never seen. The stillness she had first mistaken for menace revealed, finally, as exactly what it was. Stay here, he said. No. Rosalind. You need someone in that dining room who does not look like a threat, she said. Every one of your men would clear that bar in 10 seconds, and he would know exactly what he walked into. I can walk up to him and refill his water and find out what he actually wants before this turns into something that gets people killed in front of 40 paying customers. It was, she would admit later, an insane plan born out of adrenaline and fear and something that was beginning to feel dangerously close to love. But Matteo, staring at her with an expression that mixed terror and awe in equal measure, did not argue. He nodded once and positioned 2 of his men at the kitchen door where they could see the bar without being seen, and Rosalind walked back into the dining room with a water pitcher in her hand and her heart hammering hard enough that she was certain the whole room could hear it. Can I get you anything else? She asked Nico Russo, refilling his glass though it was still half full. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched recognition cross his face, slow and certain, and understood in that instant that he already knew exactly who she was. You're her, he said, the waitress. I'm a waitress, There's a few of us here. Conti's waitress. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. You should have picked a different section to work 3 months ago. And you should have picked a different restaurant to threaten women in, she said, and set the pitcher down with a click that was louder than she meant it to be, and did not step back, though every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run. Whatever message you think you're sending, I'm not carrying it for you. You don't get a choice in that. I always get a choice, she said. That's the thing men like you never understand about women like me. His hand moved toward his jacket, fast, and in the half-second that followed, 3 things happened almost at once. Matteo's men closed the distance from the kitchen door faster than she had thought possible. Rosalind threw the remaining water from the pitcher directly into Nico Russo's face, buying a single crucial second of blindness and confusion. And Matteo himself came through the dining room like something unleashed, closing his hand around Russo's wrist with a grip that made the other man cry out and drop whatever he had been reaching for onto the polished floor with a metallic clatter that silenced the entire restaurant. It was over in under 10 seconds. Russo was on the ground, restrained, disarmed, and the diners around them had gone from confused to frightened to, slowly, aware that whatever had just happened was already finished. Matteo's men had him out the service door within a minute, and the restaurant, shaken but largely unharmed, resumed its low murmur of conversation, as if the last 10 seconds had been a trick of the light. Matteo turned to her immediately, his hands finding her shoulders, his eyes moving over her face and body with the frantic precision of a man checking for damage he was terrified to find. You are insane, he said. You threw water at an armed man. It worked. It could have gotten you killed. It didn't. She was shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her, but she held his gaze anyway. I told you I could help. I helped. He did not answer that with words. He answered it by pulling her against him, one hand cradling the back of her head, and for a long moment they simply stood there in the wreckage of the last minute, her heart still slamming, his breath unsteady against her hair, and something between them that had been building for 3 months finally, quietly, arrived. I am not letting you go home alone tonight, he said, into her hair, and it was not a command this time, it was a plea. I wasn't planning on it, she said, and felt him go still with something like relief, and understood, in that moment, that whatever came next, she had already made her choice, and she had made it with her eyes open. The days that followed moved fast, the way things move fast when a war that has been simmering under the surface finally breaks into the open. Nico Russo's family, furious at the failed attempt and the public humiliation of it, escalated within the week, and the city Rosalind had lived in her entire life became, briefly, a battlefield she had not asked to be conscripted into. Matteo moved her, over her loud and frequent objections, into a townhouse with better security than the restaurant itself, and told her, plainly, that he intended to end this the right way, the way his father had taught him, through the commission, and not through the streets. A sit-down that would either resolve the territory dispute for good, or end it in a way from which there was no coming back. She went with him to that sit-down, against every protest from every man in his organization, because she had earned her place at that table 3 weeks ago in a way none of them fully understood yet, and because Matteo, when it came down to it, could not find a version of the plan that did not include her standing beside him. The room was cold and quiet, 6 men from 3 different families seated around a table that had settled disputes for 40 years, and Salvatore Conti sat at his son's right hand, silent and watchful, and Rosalind sat at his left, the only woman in the room, and felt every eye on her before a single word was spoken. You brought a waitress to a sit-down, the head of the Russo family said, disdain thick in every syllable. I brought a witness, Matteo said, the same witness your nephew tried to have watched, followed, and photographed for 3 weeks before he made his move inside my restaurant. She saw what he did. She can tell this table exactly how it happened, if this table would prefer the truth over whatever version your nephew already told you. Rosalind told them, calmly, precisely, the same directness she had used on Salvatore Conti the first day she met him, and she watched the room shift as she spoke, watched men who had come in ready for war recalibrate in real time as the facts refused to bend to the story they had arrived believing. Your nephew targeted a civilian to send a message to my family, Matteo said when she had finished. That is not how this business has ever been conducted. Not under my father, not under his father before him. You want my territory, you come to me directly, man to man, the way it has always been done. You do not put a target on the back of a woman who has never once in her life picked up a weapon against anyone. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Salvatore Conti spoke, for the first time since sitting down, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of exactly this kind of room. My son is being generous, the old man said. I am not certain I would have been. Nico Russo does not touch this family again. He does not touch this woman again. If he does, this discussion is finished, and what comes next will not be a discussion. The head of the Russo family, faced with the old man's flat, unblinking certainty and the very public, very embarrassing failure of his own operation, chose the path every man in that room had known he would eventually choose. He conceded. The territory dispute ended not with blood, but with a handshake that meant, in this world, something far more binding than any signature. And Nico Russo, Rosalind later learned, was sent somewhere far from the city and never returned. It should have felt like victory. For a while, it did. But 2 days after the sit-down, as Rosalind packed up the last of her things from her old apartment, a decision she had made quietly and without asking Matteo's permission, she found him waiting for her on the front steps, his face unreadable in a way that frightened her more than Nico Russo ever had. You should not have come to that room, he said. I told myself it was necessary, and it was. But I put you in a room with men who kill people for less than what you said to them, and I have not stopped thinking about how close it could have gone the other way. But it didn't. This time. He stood, closing the distance between them, and for the first time since she had known him, his composure had fully cracked, revealing something raw and afraid underneath it that had nothing to do with tactics or territory. I do not know how to have you in my life without also having this fear in it every single day. That is the truth of what I am asking you to accept, Rosalind. Not flowers, not safety. Fear, every day, for the rest of however long we have. I already know what I'm choosing, she said. I chose it the day I sat down at your father's table instead of running like everyone else in that restaurant. I'm not choosing it because I'm naive about what it costs. I'm choosing it because I already know the cost, and I'm choosing you anyway. He kissed her then, finally, in the gray afternoon light on the steps of an apartment she was already leaving behind. And it was not gentle, and it was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who had spent 3 months holding himself in absolute check, finally letting go of the last of it. And she met him with the same certainty, her hands fisting in the front of his coat, and somewhere behind them a delivery truck honked, and neither of them heard it at all. 6 weeks later, Salvatore Conti hosted another private dinner at Verrazzano, and this time Rosalind was not working it. She was seated at his right hand, in a dress that had cost more than a month of her old rent, and when the old man raised his glass to make a toast, the whole room, Matteo's men and Matteo's associates and the handful of family who remained, went quiet to listen. 3 months ago, Salvatore said, A waitress in this restaurant refused to be afraid of me. I have thought about that every day since, because in 70 years, very few people have looked at me and seen a man instead of a threat. My son looked at her and saw the same thing I saw. I am too old and too tired to pretend I do not know what that means. He looked at Rosalind, and something in his weathered face softened in a way she suspected very few people in this room had ever witnessed. Welcome to this family, Rosalind. God help the rest of us, because I do not think any of us are prepared for how much truth you are about to make us listen to. The table laughed, real laughter, and across it Matteo caught her eye, and there was nothing careful left in the way he looked at her, nothing held back, only the plain, unguarded truth of a man who had stopped pretending he had any defenses left where she was concerned. Later, after the guests had gone and the restaurant had emptied, they stood together in the same narrow hallway where he had first warned her away from him, and she thought about how far they had both come from that conversation, and how glad she was that she had never once, not one single time, listened to his warning. "Any regrets?" he asked her, his hand finding hers in the dim light. "Only that I didn't ignore you sooner," she said, and he laughed, low and real, and pulled her against him, and outside the window the city moved on the way it always did, indifferent to the war that had almost broken out inside it, and the woman who had refused to run from a table everyone else was too afraid to serve. If this story kept you hooked until the very last word, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you want more slow-burn Mafia romance delivered straight to your feed, and drop a comment telling me which moment made your heart stop the hardest. Was it the water pitcher, the sit-down, or the kiss on the steps? I read every single one of them, and I have so many more stories like this one waiting for you. See you in the next video.